The hammer swung with a heavy, satisfying thud against the rotted drywall of my new kitchen. But as the plaster crumbled away, I didn't find the support beams I expected. Instead, I found a hollow, suffocating darkness that smelled of wet copper and old secrets. I am standing there, holding my breath as the dust settles, staring into a gap that shouldn't exist according to the property deeds I signed just 3 weeks ago. My name is Elias, and I thought I was lucky to buy this fixer-upper at a foreclosure auction, but as I shine my flashlight through the jagged hole in the pantry wall, I realize that the previous owner didn't just leave behind junk. They left behind a room that was never meant to be found. The beam of my light cuts through the thick layers of dust, revealing a small, windowless chamber no larger than a walk-in closet, furnished only with a single metal folding chair and a stack of black plastic bins. I feel a cold shiver run down my spine because the air coming from that room is moving, which means there is a ventilation source somewhere that I haven't accounted for. I step through the wreckage of the wall, my boots crunching on the debris, and that is when I see it. A small, modern tripod sitting in the corner, holding a smartphone that is plugged into a portable power bank. The screen is dark, but the lens is pointed directly at the hole I just made, as if it has been waiting for someone to break through and show their face. I reach out to touch the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and I notice that the device is warm to the touch. It hasn't been sitting here for years. It has been recording recently, perhaps even today, which sends a surge of pure adrenaline through my veins. I pull the phone from the tripod and try to wake the screen, but it is locked with a passcode, and as I stand there in the silence of my empty house, I hear a faint, metallic scrape coming from the floorboards directly above my head. I am supposed to be alone in this house, yet the sound is deliberate, a slow and heavy footfall that stops exactly where the hidden room ends. I kill my flashlight and stand perfectly still in the pitch-black darkness of the pantry, my ears ringing with the sound of my own frantic pulse. The house is an old Victorian, full of creaks and groans, but this sound was different. It was the sound of someone who knows exactly which floorboards are loose and which ones are silent. I wait for what feels like hours, though it is likely only minutes, until I hear the front door of the house creak open and then click shut with a soft, final thud. I realize then that my contractor, a man named Marcus who has been helping me with the heavy demolition, has a key to the front door and was supposed to arrive in an hour to help me finish the kitchen. I climb out of the hidden room and try to act natural, placing the mysterious phone in my pocket and covering the hole in the wall with a sheet of plywood. When Marcus walks into the kitchen, he looks at me with a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes, and he asks me if I've made any interesting discoveries while he was gone. I lie to him, telling him that I spent the morning working on the plumbing in the upstairs bathroom, but I can see his gaze shifting toward the pantry where the fresh dust is still settling on the floor. He lingers by the pantry, his hand resting on the handle of his heavy tool bag, and he mentions that the house has a lot of dead space that we might need to open up later tonight. The sun begins to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the unfinished hardwood floors, and I feel a growing sense of dread as Marcus insists on staying late to catch up on the schedule. He suggests we work into the night, claiming that the silence of the evening helps him focus on the structural details, but I can see him watching me every time I turn my back. I make an excuse to go to my car to get a fresh pair of work gloves, but as I reach for my keys, I realize they are missing from the kitchen counter where I left them. I turn around and see Marcus standing in the shadows of the hallway, holding my keychain in his hand with a look of feigned confusion, asking if these were what I was looking for. The atmosphere in the house shifts from productive to predatory in an instant, and I realize that he isn't going to let me leave until he knows what I saw in that hidden room. I manage to take my keys back, my hands shaking as I pocket them, and I tell him that I'm feeling unwell and that we should call it a night. He nods slowly, his silhouette blocking the only exit to the backyard, and he tells me that he'll just finish up one last thing in the basement before he heads out. I watch him descend the stairs, the basement door clicking shut behind him, and I immediately run for the front door, but the deadbolt has been jammed from the outside with a piece of metal wire. I am trapped in my own home, a house that is currently a construction site filled with sharp tools and dark corners, and the man downstairs is no longer just a contractor. I hear the basement door creak open again, and the sound of heavy boots begins to ascend the stairs, moving with a terrifying, rhythmic patience. I realize I cannot hide in the main rooms, so I do the only thing I can think of. I run back to the pantry, slide behind the plywood, and pull myself back into the hidden chamber. I press myself against the cold, damp back wall, hoping that he didn't see me slip inside, and I pray that the darkness will keep me invisible. I hear him enter the kitchen, his voice a low, gravelly whisper as he calls my name, telling me that there is no reason to be afraid and that we just need to talk about what's in the bins. He starts tearing the plywood away from the wall, the wood splintering and cracking under his strength, and I realize that the bins in this room are likely filled with the things he has stolen from other job sites or worse. I look around the tiny room frantically for a weapon or an exit, and my hand brushes against a heavy iron pipe that was part of the old ventilation system. As the last of the plywood falls away, revealing the opening, I see his face illuminated by the harsh glow of his work light, and his eyes are wide with a frantic, desperate greed. He lunges into the small space, his hands reaching for my throat, but I swing the iron pipe with every ounce of strength I have left, catching him squarely in the shoulder. He bellows in pain and stumbles back into the kitchen, tripping over the piles of debris and crashing into the center island. I don't wait for him to get up. I scramble out of the hole, sprinting toward the large bay window in the living room that I had planned to replace next week. I grab a heavy framing hammer from the floor and smash the glass, the shards exploding outward into the cool night air like 1,000 tiny diamonds. I dive through the broken window, ignoring the scratches on my arms and legs, and I hit the overgrown grass of the front yard with a heavy thud. I don't look back until I reach the safety of the streetlights, where I see my neighbor standing on his porch, looking at me with total shock. I tell him to call the police, my voice cracking and raw, and as the sirens begin to wail in the distance, I see Marcus emerge from the front door of my house. He looks at me for a long moment, his face a mask of fury and defeat, before he turns and vanishes into the dark woods that border the property. The police arrive minutes later, and as they search the house, they find more than just the hidden room in the pantry. They find a second hidden space behind the master bedroom closet that contained a high-end computer setup and dozens of hard drives filled with surveillance footage from various houses Marcus had worked on over the years. He wasn't just a thief. He was a voyeur who used his job to build secret annexes in people's homes so he could watch them long after the renovations were finished. I am safe now, staying in a hotel across town, but I can't stop thinking about the warmth of that phone screen and how close I came to becoming just another file on one of those drives. I sold the house a month later, but every time I enter a room now, I find myself tapping on the walls, listening for the hollow sound of a secret that was never meant to be mine. The rhythmic tapping started at exactly 3:14 a.m., a sound so precise and persistent that it felt less like a house settling and more like a heartbeat made of wood and iron. I lay perfectly still in the master bedroom of my late Uncle Arthur's estate, a sprawling, decaying Victorian that smelled of damp parchment and unwashed history. My uncle was a man of immense silence and even greater secrets, a reclusive librarian who had left me this house on the condition that I never sell the mahogany bookshelf that spanned the entire western wall of the study. I had arrived 3 days ago to begin the inventory of his life, but the house felt like it was studying me instead. I swung my legs out of bed, the floorboards screaming under my weight, and grabbed the heavy brass flashlight from the nightstand. The tapping was coming from the floor below, specifically from the study where the air always felt 5 degrees colder than the rest of the house. As I descended the grand staircase, the shadows cast by my flashlight danced like elongated specters against the peeling wallpaper. I reached the study door and pushed it open, the heavy oak groaning on its hinges as if protesting my entry. The sound was louder here, a dull thud-clack, that seemed to originate from directly behind the massive bookshelf. I ran my fingers along the spines of the leather-bound books, searching for any sign of a mechanism, my mind racing with the possibility that Arthur had been hiding more than just rare editions. Suddenly, my hand brushed against a copy of Dante's Inferno that felt strangely cold, and as I pulled the spine, a heavy click echoed through the room. The entire central section of the bookshelf swung inward with a ghostly smoothness, revealing a narrow, stone-lined passage that descended into a dark, sub-basement level that wasn't on any of the house plans. I hesitated at the threshold, the curiosity gap in my mind widening into a chasm of pure dread. But the tapping had stopped the moment the door opened, and the silence that followed was even more terrifying. I stepped into the hidden room, my flashlight beam cutting through a thick layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in decades. The room was a cold storage vault, filled with rows of wooden crates and a single, heavy iron desk in the center. On top of the desk sat a ledger and a small, handheld radio that was crackling with a low-frequency hum. I opened the ledger and my blood turned to ice as I realized my uncle hadn't been a simple librarian. He had been a cleaner for a local criminal syndicate, using this hidden vault to store collateral and evidence that they couldn't risk keeping themselves. The crates around me weren't filled with books. They were filled with ledgers, high-end electronics, and bundles of old currency. Just as I reached for the radio, the silence of the vault was shattered by a heavy, metallic bang coming from the study above. Someone had entered the house, and they hadn't used the front door. I heard voices, low and jagged like broken glass, whispering about the key and the collateral that Arthur was supposed to have turned over before his heart gave out. I realized then that the tapping hadn't been coming from inside the wall. It had been a signal from outside, a scout checking if the house was occupied before the rest of the crew moved in. I killed my light and ducked behind the iron desk, my breathing shallow and ragged, as the sound of heavy footsteps moved across the study floor toward the hidden entrance. The bookshelf creaked as it was pushed fully open, and the harsh light of a powerful industrial lantern flooded the vault, casting long, menacing shadows against the stone walls. I could see two men, their faces obscured by heavy work jackets and caps, as they began to systematically check the crates. One of them laughed, a sound devoid of any humor, and remarked that the old man's nephew was likely sleeping soundly upstairs, oblivious to the fortune sitting beneath his feet. My heart was hammering so loudly I was certain they would hear it, but then the second man stopped and pointed his light directly at the floor where I had walked. He noticed the trail I had left in the thick dust, a clear path leading straight to the iron desk where I was currently huddled. He didn't shout. He simply pulled a heavy, snub-nosed revolver from his pocket and began to walk slowly toward my hiding spot, his boots clicking rhythmically on the stone floor. I looked around the desk in a panic and saw a heavy glass inkwell and a set of iron shears used for binding books. I grabbed the shears, my knuckles white with tension, and waited for the shadow to overlap my own. Just as he reached the edge of the desk, I didn't wait for him to look over. I shoved the heavy iron desk with every bit of desperate strength I possessed. The metal legs screeched across the stone, catching the man off guard and pinning his leg against the crates behind him. He let out a sharp cry of pain and dropped the lantern, which shattered on the floor, plunging the room into a chaotic half-light of flickering oil flames from the old lantern's wick. I bolted from behind the desk, sprinting toward the stone stairs as the second man shouted and began firing blindly into the darkness. The bullets ricocheted off the stone walls with terrifying whines, but I reached the study and slammed the bookshelf shut, frantically searching for a way to lock it from the outside. I grabbed a heavy iron fire poker from the hearth and jammed it through the handles of the shelving unit, just as the men began to throw their weight against the hidden door from the other side. The wood groaned and splintered, but the poker held, buying me the precious seconds I needed to reach the kitchen and grab my phone. I didn't try to go out the front door, knowing they likely had a lookout stationed in the driveway. Instead, I ran to the servants' entrance in the back, a small door that was hidden by overgrown ivy, and I slipped out into the freezing night air. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road, my lungs burning and my vision blurring with exhaustion. I saw the headlights of a passing patrol car and flagged them down, collapsing onto the pavement as the officer stepped out. The police raided the estate an hour later, capturing both men who were still trapped in the sub-basement vault, having been unable to break through the reinforced bookshelf from the inside. They found enough evidence in that hidden room to dismantle a criminal network that had operated in the shadows for over 30 years. I never went back to the house to finish the inventory, and I sold the property to a developer who planned to tear it down to the foundation. Sometimes at night, I still wake up at exactly 3:14 a.m., listening for that rhythmic tapping, wondering if my uncle left anything else behind that was never meant to be found. The wind howled through the skeletal branches of the oaks surrounding my new property, but the sound that truly chilled my blood wasn't the storm. It was the rhythmic, metallic scraping coming from beneath the floorboards of the tool shed at the edge of the yard. My name is Julian, and I had recently purchased this rural farmhouse to escape the city, unaware that the land held a subterranean history dating back to the Prohibition era. I stood on the back porch, clutching a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold, staring at the shed as the motion sensor light flickered on for the third time that hour. There was no wind strong enough to trigger that sensor, and there were no animals large enough to create a sound that heavy and deliberate. I decided to investigate, grabbing a heavy-duty flashlight and a crowbar from the mudroom, my heart already thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The grass was slick with dew as I crossed the yard, the silence of the night feeling heavy and artificial, like a curtain about to be pulled back. I pushed open the shed door, and the smell of damp earth and rusted iron hit me instantly, far stronger than it had been during the daytime. I moved a stack of empty fertilizer bags and saw it, a wooden hatch perfectly flush with the floor that I had completely missed during my initial inspection. The hatch wasn't locked, but as I pried it open with the crowbar, I realized the hinges had been recently oiled, sliding back without a single squeak. I shone my light down into the darkness, revealing a narrow brick-lined tunnel that stretched toward the foundation of the main house. This was an old rum runner tunnel, a relic of a dangerous past, but as I looked closer, I saw a pair of muddy boots sitting neatly at the bottom of the ladder. They weren't old or rotted. They were modern work boots, still wet from the evening rain. A surge of pure, icy adrenaline spiked through my system as I realized I wasn't looking at a historical curiosity, but a current residence. I should have turned back and called the police then, but the curiosity gap was too wide. I needed to know if the intruder was in the tunnel or already inside my home. I climbed down the ladder, the air growing colder and thinner with every step, until my feet hit the packed dirt floor. The tunnel was low, forcing me to hunch over, and as I moved forward, I noticed something that made my breath catch in my throat. A series of small, hand-drawn marks were etched into the brickwork at eye level, counting something. Days, weeks, or perhaps the number of times I had walked over this very spot while I was in my kitchen. I reached a point directly beneath my living room and saw a small, makeshift wooden shelf bolted to the wall. On it sat 3 of my kitchen knives, the ones that had gone missing over the last week, lined up from largest to smallest. Beside them was a handwritten list of my daily schedule, when I left for work, when I ate dinner, and exactly what time I usually turned off the lights to go to sleep. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just being robbed. I was being studied by someone who had been living inches beneath my feet for heaven knows how long. Suddenly, the sound of a heavy footstep echoed from the far end of the tunnel, coming from the direction of the house. I killed my flashlight immediately, the darkness becoming a thick, suffocating weight as I pressed myself into a shallow alcove in the brickwork. I heard a man's voice, a low, raspy mumble, complaining about the new tenant and how he shouldn't have changed the locks on the back door. The footsteps grew closer, slow and dragging, accompanied by the metallic clink of a heavy chain. I held my breath until my lungs burned, my eyes straining to adjust to the void, until a faint glow appeared around the corner. The man was carrying a small lantern, and as he stepped into the light, I saw a face that was gaunt, weathered, and etched with a terrifying, singular focus. He stopped at the shelf, reaching out to stroke the blade of the largest knife with a terrifyingly familiar affection. He was less than 5 feet away from me, and I knew that if I moved, he would have that knife in my ribs before I could scream. He started to climb a second ladder, one that led to a hidden trapdoor inside my own pantry, and I realized that he was heading into the house while he thought I was still outside. This was my only chance to trap him or escape, but my crowbar was back at the entrance of the tunnel, and I was armed with nothing but a dying flashlight. I waited until I heard the faint click of the pantry door opening above, and then I moved with a speed born of pure terror. I scrambled back through the tunnel, my hands scraping against the rough bricks, until I reached the shed ladder. I climbed out, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and I didn't just close the shed hatch. I dragged a heavy cast iron wood stove that was stored in the corner over the top of the wooden door. I heard a muffled shout of surprise from deep underground, followed by a violent thud as he realized his secondary exit was being blocked. I didn't wait to hear more. I sprinted to the house, locked the back door, and grabbed my phone from the charger. I called the emergency services, my voice shaking as I explained that there was a man in a tunnel beneath my kitchen floor. As I waited for the police, I stood in the center of the kitchen, staring at the pantry door. The handle began to turn, slowly at first, then violently, as the man tried to force his way up from the darkness. He was screaming now, a raw, animalistic sound, demanding that I let him back into his house. I grabbed a heavy kitchen chair and wedged it under the pantry door handle, leaning my entire weight against it as the wood began to splinter from the pressure below. The minutes felt like hours, the sounds of his desperation echoing through the floorboards, until finally, the blue and red lights of the police cruisers began to sweep across the kitchen walls. The officers moved in quickly, and it took 4 of them to submerge into that tunnel and pull the man out. They later identified him as an escaped convict who had grown up in this house decades ago and knew about the Prohibition Tunnel before the blueprints were ever updated. He had been living in the crawl spaces and the tunnel for nearly a month, surviving on the food he swiped from my pantry while I was at work. I moved out the following week, unable to spend another night in a house where the walls felt like they were watching me. I live in a modern high-rise now on the 20th floor, where the only thing beneath my feet is solid concrete and 15 floors of people I hope I never have to meet.